Hello, this is monetary. Sorry.
You're good, dude. Just do it. Just do it.
I don't know what to do.
Just do it.
Hey, this is Monetary Therapy. My name is Travis Kendall.
And I'm Elio Harmon.
We got episode 1 for you right here. We're doing a little bit of background on Elio's story. Take a listen. So Elio, you have an interesting background that I think is a lot more unique than at least me specifically. I think mine's pretty boring. Where are you from?
Well, I'm from Liberia, West Africa originally. My family immigrated to the States back in 1993. But, I mean, when it comes to finances, I never knew how good I had it when I was a little kid, man. There are a lot of things I think a lot of us take for granted, but especially me when it came to finances.
So being an American, what is good in Liberia?
Well, I mean, in Liberia, one of the things that I think any Liberian would tell you is just the lack of debt.
Okay. So lack of debt is good.
Yeah,
Cool,
lack
perfect.
of debt is absolutely awesome. It's the best thing, and I think it's one of the things that as Africans we take for granted. A lot of people look at the African lifestyle, at least what's shown on TV, and they just think, oh my God, these impoverished people. But one of the things that you don't clearly see or you wouldn't jump to a conclusion about is the fact that none of these people have debt.
Okay. So maybe being good financially in Liberia is actually better than America because we have so much debt here, right?
Well, in some sense, I think I think clearly the standard of living in some cases, and I'll kind of get to mine in a second, but in some cases is lower.
Okay.
However, I think for a lot of Americans, their standard of living is subsidized by debt. And so would you really have that standard of living if you didn't have access to debt? That's one of the things that I really look at as I drive down the street and say, hey, look, is this real or is this kind of a facade? And so, yeah, that's kind of the difference.
Okay. So at least in Liberia, not nearly as much debt, or is it just being good where you were was debt free?
Well, I think access to debt, because we don't quite have the banking structure that you have here in the States, whether or not debt was available, it possibly was, but it was so limited, the people who could access it, that generally most people didn't plan to access debt for major purchases. So if you wanted to buy a home, you saved money, you bought the land, you built the house, and you owned it at the end of that process. But here, it's like, when it's time to buy a house, I'll just go get a mortgage. And so it was completely different.
Okay, absolutely. And so when were you born there?
So I was born in 1981.
Okay.
And my mother and father, my dad was a senator, so he was involved in politics. We have a long history of politics in my family. My mom was a housewife, and I'm the last of 6 kids. And so we basically had an upper middle class upbringing. Now, this is when I was preparing for the show, going back and really looking at it. But in hindsight, I realized that we were upper middle class. But living through it, I thought I just had an average upbringing because it wasn't anything that you could tell that we weren't conspicuous in our spending.
Okay.
So I knew I had a meal on the table. I knew I could go out and have fun, but I generally wasn't measuring wealth by things that you could see. I was just a little kid having a good time, and I knew that, if I needed anything, I could ask for it. Didn't always get it, but I knew I could go ask for it.
And were the people that you were surrounded by in your neighborhoods and everything like that around the same economic status as you?
Well, that's kind of another different thing about Liberia as well. Even in the present day, after a civil war that really devastated the country, you'll find wealth and squalor not too far from each other. But back in the 80s, there was less of that.
Okay.
And so generally your neighbors, our neighbors, were in a similar, if not higher, socioeconomic status than we were. But
Okay.
generally, it could be mixed. And I mean, it's a matter of 1,000 yards or so. It's not like where a neighborhood here might be all of a particular part of the city are people who are fairly well-to-do, and then you have to really cross town to see a different socioeconomic status. There, it was a little bit more stark.
And so is there enough of a difference for a young child to tell when you were there? Or is it, looking back now, you can kind of make those distinctions?
Well, looking back, I could make those distinctions more clearly. As a kid, you kind of know,
Okay.
right? So, and it's not that you know and now you feel better about yourself. It's just something that you notice.
Okay.
It's not something that you're making judgments about the world one way or another. Why are we at one station in life and why is my neighbor 1,000 yards down the road at a different station in life? When kids get together, they're just kids. And so when I was 5, 6 years old, I wasn't thinking about that. But I could tell the difference. And so it wasn't just that we lived in the city. My parents had a farm, and we would go to the farm. And now when you're in rural Africa, you could really tell the difference. This is where you see kids with no shoes on.
Okay.
And so hey, this kid really doesn't have it. But what you realize is that kid is not super unhappy either. He's just as happy being a kid running around with no shoes on. His primary concern is not, hey, I need to get some shoes, right? His concern is, I just want to be a kid. Yeah. Now, it would be nice to have some shoes, but I'm just a kid. So I'll play with my shoes off. It's not safe for them to play with their shoes off, obviously. So, if you can give to people like that, you would want to give to them. But they're not super preoccupied with the fact that they don't have shoes. He just wants to be a kid.
And do you think that's just the kid thing, or do you think that's with the parents too, where it's just, there's no option to have shoes, so you don't worry about it?
Well, I think it's all about comparison. I heard this saying, I watch YouTube all the time in research for this show, but I forget who the gentleman was, but he travels to Africa and he asks a pastor there, what's the single biggest issue you see in your town? And the pastor says, greed. And he's like, greed in rural Africa? These people don't have anything. Well, he said, that's the thing about men. If they have 1 cow, they want 2. If they have 2 goats, they want 3. If they have a mud house, they want a brick house. And so I can't really say for adults that that's the same thing, because I think marketing, advertising, upward mobility, this idea that you have to always be making progress, whether or not that's from the outside or maybe even something that's just innately human, it's really hard to say whether or not adults had the same attitude. I'm sure adults looking at their kids with no shoes had a better vision for their life. But as a kid playing with other kids who didn't have shoes,
who knows?
That wasn't their primary objective. They just wanted to have a good time.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So then where did that take you? At what point did America come into the play for the
family? America wasn't a decision by choice. Now, I think, when we talk about immigration in the States, it's clear America does have its advantages, but because of our kind of financial situation, at least my family's, we weren't planning to come to America. Really, the way we saw America was a place that you went for vacation or holidays or to go shopping. And so if my mom or dad said they were going to the U.S. or they were going to Europe, we knew we were going to have a pretty good Christmas. Okay. Because you don't have access to the same consumer goods there as you do if you travel overseas. So that's really how we saw America. But there was a civil war in Liberia. Started back in, don't quote me on this, 1989 or so, I think, and lasted all the way up until 1994, 1995. For you listeners of the show who are from Liberia or know about the Liberian Civil War, please call me on this on social media. But I think that I'm doing this from memory. However, so my father was a senator, and what you'll any kind of third world, I'm just saying it that way because that's what most people might understand it to be. But if there's conflict and there's a change in government, it's not always a democratic change, and even democratic changes can be questioned as to whether or not they were legitimate. However, my father, being a senator in the previous administration, had to seek asylum in the U.S. So we left Liberia, we went to Sierra Leone as refugees. One of the fortunate things, though, again, it's looking back and looking at that 2020 hindsight vision, was we fled our country as refugees, and we went to Sierra Leone, and because of generations of sound financial decisions, we could go over there, rent an apartment. We didn't have to live in a refugee camp. And so although we didn't have the same standard of living we had in Liberia, we had a better standard of living than we otherwise would have if those financial decisions weren't made generations ago and sustained through my father. And so he had some money. We went over to Sierra Leone. We could rent apartments.
And
now,
where is Sierra Leone? How you spell it?
Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
And where is that?
It's a neighboring country of Liberia. So basically, if you're thinking about size, let's say Liberia is Ohio and Sierra Leone is Indiana. So it would be literally just driving a few hours over to cross the border.
So your family, there is a regime change, and so your family has to go ahead and head out for safety and other reasons. So you head next door. How long were you there, and how old were you when that change happened?
So we left in 1990, Liberia, and we were there for 3 years, give or take.
So you were 9?
Yeah,
8,
I was 9 years old because I came here when I was 12. So yeah, we were in Sierra Leone, and I mean, one of the things, looking back again, that I know are a sign of kind of the important, or maybe our social station, was the fact that I received an excellent education when I was a little kid. That was one thing that my parents spared no expense on. So although, I didn't have all of the, millions of possessions or material things, one of the things that they made sure I had was a good education. So even in Sierra Leone, I wasn't going to public schools in Sierra Leone.
Really?
And so I missed out kind of at that, fifth, sixth grade kind of learning time period in my education. However, they got me a tutor.
Okay.
And so somebody who tutored me in math and English. And so I didn't fall back very much, even though I wasn't going to school full time. So we spent about 3 years in Sierra Leone. My father came to the States for his uncle's funeral, and then filed for political asylum because he couldn't return home. That was granted him by the United States. And one of the things I have a great deal of respect for my father for is the fact that he came over, but he still took care of his family and made sure that we all could come over eventually once he got settled, got a job, could show that he could support us, and we wouldn't come over and be dependent on welfare or whatever else some of the concerns might be for that many people. You need to have the financial ability to support them if you're going to bring them over.
Absolutely. So he comes over. How long until the family follows? And then what is the family that your father is now trying to bring over?
Well, it's myself, my mom, and 2 brothers.
Okay.
I had a sister here already in the States. So she came over much earlier before the war even started. And I had a brother and sister in Ghana.
Okay.
And so those are the folks that he's trying to bring over. And so my eldest brother and sister join us from Ghana in Sierra Leone before we come over. So, I mean, that's a total of 5 people. Well, no, 6 people actually, counting my mom. And so that was a lot to get done, but he got it done.
And then, so did you land directly in Ohio here, or?
No. So we actually flew to New York, JFK. Most international flights into the United States go to JFK.
Yeah. At least a couple of them, right?
Yeah, just at least a couple. So we flew into JFK, but my eldest sister was staying in New York at the time, so it just made sense. We spent some time with her, and then we had some family out in Jersey, and so we settled in Jersey initially. I started going to school there, and then my dad, in search of greener pastures, more economic, a better economic outlook, started looking around the country for where we could move to. Now, we lived in Trenton, New Jersey when we were there, and Trenton was absolutely devastated by the I guess the crash in manufacturing on the East Coast and losing a lot of blue collar jobs that were shipped overseas by globalization and things of that nature. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity for someone looking for a middle class job. I guess you can flash forward Trenton, New Jersey back then, early 90s, is more so like maybe Detroit, Michigan is, or
okay.
The perception that we have of Detroit, Michigan, at least what makes it on the news. And so he's searching around and he says Ohio, and I'm now I'm a little kid, Spent like 3 years or so in New Jersey. I think Ohio is just a hick town. Like, why are we even moving to Ohio? Like, it's not even cool out there. It's just farmland. So it was a little bit of a transition for me, but we moved to Ohio, and I love it, man. Columbus, Ohio is like my second home. Well, not even my second home. It's my first home now. I've spent more time in the States than in Liberia, but so I'm thoroughly adjusted, and I love living in Columbus.
All right. So what age were you there? So you spent about 3 years in Jersey. So you're about 16 now by the time you get to Ohio?
Yeah, I'm in the I think I'm a sophomore at the time.
Okay.
So we move over in right after no. Actually, I'm a freshman at the time. So yeah, I'm right around 15 years old when we move over, and not having any friends going into high school. You know how that can be.
We'll pretend I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I never moved anywhere. I just grew up in Pinkerton. But yeah, I totally knew what it was like to have no friends going into high school.
So you can imagine like the movie version of this, where the new kid in town is like new in high school. No, nobody. So
did you get guff for being foreign?
Oh yeah, in middle school was terrible, man.
Really?
Because I had that. But here's the thing, though. I think there were a lot of. I was basically stereotyped.
Okay.
And so one of the things that worked out for me, I think bullying gets loosely thrown around now. Like every time like a kid gets teased, like he's being bullied or something like that. I mean, kids goof off all the time. I think mine wasn't. I had to stand up for myself at some point. But what really stood out, what really helped me out was the fact that I was highly intelligent. And so, well, I can't really say that.
Keep talking. I want to hear more about how intelligent you are.
Yeah. You guys will get to know how intelligent I am over time. But
here's that education coming in, right?
Exactly. So here's where the investment in education really paid off for me, is because I would sit in class, and it was my first time being in a school where kids weren't eager. One of the things in Liberia is if you know the answer, you're gonna put your hands up, and even if you don't know the answer and you're not putting your hands up, you're gonna be called on, and so you got to be prepared. And so they were surprised, like, how come this kid from Africa, fresh off the boat or whatever, knows this material? Well, that's because I had been working really, really hard academically, even though I had an interruption in my learning. That was one of the things where people then started to say, okay, well, he's not your typical African or whatever. He's, he can handle the academic material, but that still didn't stop it. And so it was at some point just standing up for myself and saying, okay, the next person who says something to me, I'm gonna punch him in the mouth. And then somebody said something to me, I'm like, I'm gonna see you after school. And so school bell rings, the classic, all the kids are like, fight. And the kid who had been kind of the most, he was trying to get under my skin the most, was the kid that I confronted. And so after school, he takes off. Nobody can find him. And from that point on, nobody really messed with me. It was just, at some point, you got to just do that. So. Yeah, I had to do it.
And so, is this a public school or is it a private school here?
It's a public school.
Okay, so you go from being in kind of private schools, being tutored, and then when you move here, now you're thrown into the public school system. Mm-hmm. Is that a change for you? Can you tell the change?
Oh yeah, it's clearly a change. It's the first thing that hits you is how much kids curse here.
Okay.
So like, I'm just thinking of all the drastic differences in my kind of early educational experience and in what I experienced. It was like complete culture shock. Like I heard kids cursing for the first time. Like, what? You guys are just in middle school, and even when my parents weren't around, I didn't even feel comfortable saying something that was a curse word. And then the second thing is just the academic rigor of you really like having work, studying, and showing up to class prepared. I felt like a lot of people didn't show up to class prepared or think it was important to be prepared. And then the regard with which teachers are held was something that was a bit of a culture shock. Like you feared your teachers you didn't really fear your parents, you respected them. So you respected your teachers almost like authority figures.
Back in Liberia,
yeah. And that here was like, listen, it's like almost like I just have to be here. And at least that's what that's the body language that the students gave off. And why are you calling on me? Don't call on me. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not going to participate. So it was.
It's not like that in Liberia, huh?
No.
So so next time I go teach, because I taught for a little bit, I'm going to go teach in Liberia, where they'll actually respect you, right?
Yeah, I think you will be pleasantly surprised by how excited the kids are to learn.
Good, perfect. So now you're in Ohio. We get through high school okay. Financially, what's going on with whether or not going to college is an option? Is it?
Yeah, well, it's what you do after high school,
okay,
without giving it much thought. And so
you never thought that you weren't going to college?
No, here's why. Is because I had by that time been thoroughly Americanized, and so I wasn't thinking, well, I guess it crossed my mind, I need to get scholarships to pay for this, but hey, there's this thing called student loans. And if you need to go to school, you can get student loans. And so I wasn't really worried about it probably as much as I needed to be. So I knew I would go to school. And if not for any other reason, to keep playing football, because I played football in high school, and so I loved it. And so I wanted to go to college to keep playing.
Okay.
And so when it came time to decide on doing that, I wasn't really like, I just didn't know enough about the college search process, nor did I care. I just wanted to go to college. And so when it came down to it, I visited Wittenberg down in Springfield. I decided to go there, although they're a private college, super duper expensive, probably maybe twice as expensive as it was back then when I went in 1999. But I went to school there, and I didn't know what I wanted to study. That was when IT was really just, it was the boom years of the internet and this Web 2.0 and all of that.
Greatest year the planet's ever had. Right?
Yeah. It was going to end that year too. But my parents were putting pressure on me to study computer science.
Okay.
That was the thing to study, so I didn't want to do that. I mean, I just wanted to play football and party. It was my first time. My parents were relatively strict, so it was my first time being out of the house and on my own. So I partied a lot, and 2 years into it, I'm like, well, I'm not going to keep racking up student loan debt. I don't even know what I want to study. And I was playing football. I was a little bit banged up too. So I was like, well, the one thing I know in my family is either you're going to school or you're going to be working. So I dropped out after my sophomore year, came back to Columbus. Wittenberg's in Springfield. Came back to Columbus. And a family friend was working in the banking world at the time for one of the larger banking companies here in Central Ohio. And he got me a job as a personal banker assistant, it was called at the time. I don't even know what it's called now. But it was like a customer service rep, not really a teller, not really a personal banker, but kind of the person who points you in the right direction when you walk into the branch. And that's where I got my start in the work world.
Okay. And then, so you're now, what, 22, 21?
Give or take, yeah.
Okay. And then that's in Columbus?
That's in Columbus, yeah.
So then how long did you spend there in the banking industry before you moved on?
Well, total in the banking industry, probably from 2001, 2002 to about 2008.
Okay.
So about 7 years in banking.
Good chunk of years then.
Good chunk, not just here in Columbus, but also in Florida, because I moved to Florida for a while, and I lived in Atlanta as well. So Columbus, Florida, Atlanta, all in the banking industry over that period from 2001, 2002 to about 2008, 2009.
And was it the banking industry that took you on that field trip around to Florida and Atlanta, or?
No, it's the personal side.
Okay.
I mean, I guess it's full disclosure on the show, isn't it? So I moved to Florida. I met a girl, and I thought she was the one. And I don't know if you ever had that experience, but that was my experience. That was the reason why I moved to Florida. That didn't work out. And then I moved to Atlanta because the cost of living in Florida is absolutely outrageous.
Okay. And where in Florida were you?
I was in Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale, okay.
So Fort Lauderdale is probably, more yachts per square feet than anywhere else in the world. So it's pretty expensive for a work-a-day guy. So I want to back up a little bit.
Okay.
Because I think I need to point out that probably my biggest first financial mistake was that not researching college,
okay,
going 2 years, not getting a degree and racking up student loans.
Yeah.
Second mistake now is this kind of going down the Florida move, not really studying cost of living, what it would actually cost. And that's where I pick up my first credit card. So I start charging stuff on a credit card.
Okay, it's down in Fort Lauderdale.
That's right.
So how long have you been in the banking industry from this point?
3 years.
Okay, and so do you know the ins and outs of credit cards because you've been around that?
Well, I mean, I would say this, and it's no disrespect to people who are working at the branch level in banking, but essentially, and it might have changed by now, at least this was my personal experience, it was that you learned how to move product, right? So you learned what a checking account was, who was a good fit for it. Here are the different levels of checking account based on account balances that a person would generally hold. This is what you sell them. Okay. To deepen is the term used. To deepen the relationship, you need some add-on products, right? Because if all you have with a bank is a checking account and you get and they're charging you $5, you can go to the next bank down the street who's charging you $4 or $3 or $2 or nothing. And so in the banking industry, it's really about deepening relationships. So if you have your checking account with us, we really would like to see you also have your direct deposit. Then we would also like to see you have your bill pay. Because once you set up all your bills in there, you're not going to close that account down and then move it all over and set up everything again. So we were really looking at consumer buying behavior more so than educating people on financial literacy at that point, or being educated to be more financially literate ourselves.
So after at least 3 years in the industry of finance to some regard, you're really a salesperson. You're not like a financial advisor or guider or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, not like being a salesperson is a bad thing.
No, absolutely.
But
so when I walk into a branch, I mean,
let's just say back then.
Yeah, back then, in your experience,
in my branch,
walking into the branch, don't make any broad
right.
assumptions.
Let's not piss off the banking industry here.
But in your experience, you were salespeople. It wasn't coming in to get sound advice on whether or not to take out a credit card. It was to deepen a relationship with that corporation.
Right, but I think, maybe the information was there. So some of it is that folks in that industry or myself needed to be more proactive.
Okay.
But
even though you work doing it.
Even though you work doing it, you're still doing a job. It's kind of like being an auto mechanic of some sorts. Okay. Like, let's say you do brake changes all day, right? And then one day somebody asks you, but you need to be looking at the whole car though. But all you do is look at brakes all day.
And someone asks you, okay, my radiator shot, what do I do?
Yeah, and then you're like, talk to the radiator guy, right? So there's compartmentalization as well in banking, just like it is in healthcare. It's like if you ask your podiatrist who's taking care of your foot, like, yo, I'm having shoulder pains, he might send you to like a shoulder doctor. Okay. There are a lot of industries that would benefit greatly from looking at the bigger picture and looking at their customer, patient, client as more than just the part of them that they're treating at the current moment. But that's a special breed of advisor, I think, that's really willing to go a little bit deeper, ask the right questions, and then you have to be in love with your job too to really take, okay, I worked 8 hours, now I'm going to go home and I'm going to look at what could potentially be wrong with my client beyond what I'm trained to do, and then come back with a suggestion. I think it takes a really special person.
And that was episode 1 of Monetary Therapy. Next week coming up, we have episode 2 where we'll continue our conversation with Elio's story. Thanks for tuning in.
See you next week.